For decades, NFL history has celebrated volume, big catch totals, loud personalities, and nonstop highlights. But some of the most dangerous players ever weren't loud at all. Haven Moses was one of them. From the 1970s through Denver's first Super Bowl run, Moses averaged 18 yards every time he caught the ball, the highest career mark in Broncos history. Not for a season, for a decade. In an era that barely threw the ball, he flipped fields, stressed defenses, and delivered when it mattered most, including a dominant AFC Championship performance that sent Denver to its first Super Bowl. Yet today, his name is rarely mentioned. This story isn't about hype, it's about impact. If forgotten greatness matters to you, like, comment, and subscribe because stories like this only survive if we keep telling them. Long before NFL stadiums, long before scoreboards and stat sheets, Haven Moses was learning how to survive before he ever learned how to separate. He grew up in Compton, California, in a household led by women, his mother, aunt, and grandmother after the early loss of his father. Stability wasn't guaranteed. Housing wasn't permanent. Responsibility arrived early. And while the NFL would later marvel at his discipline and consistency, those traits weren't developed in training camp. They were forged in silence, in a childhood where showing up every day already meant winning. Moses didn't follow the clean, celebrated path to stardom. He wasn't chased by recruiters or paraded as a prodigy. He took buses across Southern California just to attend high school. He played multiple sports. He learned adaptability before he ever learned routes. And when college decisions came, he wasn't ushered into a powerhouse. He went the junior college route, the long road, the one history rarely remembers. That detour changed everything. At San Diego State University, Moses stepped into an offense led by forward-thinking coach named Don Coryell, a system built on space, timing, and aggression before the NFL was ready for any of it. Suddenly, Moses wasn't just catching passes, he was stretching fields. He was averaging 20 yards a catch against college defenses that had no answers. But here's the question history never asks. How does a receiver this explosive, this efficient, still fly under the radar? Because even as Moses was rewriting expectations, the league hadn't decided it valued players like him yet, and that hesitation would follow him all the way to draft day. When Haven Moses heard his name called ninth overall in the 1968 draft, it should have been the start of a fast climb into stardom. First-round picks are supposed to land on paths paved with opportunity. Moses didn't. Instead, he walked into chaos. The Buffalo Bills of the late 1960s weren't just rebuilding, they were unraveling. Losing seasons stacked up. Quarterbacks rotated. The AFL-NFL merger loomed overhead, swallowing teams and careers alike. Games were played in brutal wind and snow at War Memorial Stadium, where precision passing went to die. For a receiver whose greatest weapon was space and timing, the environment couldn't have been worse. Still, Moses produced. As a rookie, he adjusted immediately. By 1969, he was an AFL All-Star, stretching defenses and flashing the same big play ability he'd shown in college. His yards per catch stayed high, his efficiency stayed elite, but wins never came. And in the NFL, losing teams don't create legends, they bury them. So the narrative quietly shifted. Moses became solid, reliable, good but not special. Never mind the context and never mind the quarterbacks, never mind the fact that Buffalo won one game his rookie season. When teams struggle, someone always absorbs the blame, and for Moses, it was invisibility. By 1972, 4 seasons in, the Bills were still losing, and Moses was still dangerous. Yet instead of building around him, Buffalo moved on, trading him mid-season, barely making headlines. The question is unavoidable. How does a first-round receiver with elite efficiency become expendable? Because sometimes, greatness doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right place to be seen. And in Denver, Haven Moses was finally about to be unleashed. When Haven Moses arrived in Denver in the middle of the 1972 season, there was no press conference, no fanfare, no sense that a franchise-altering piece had just walked through the door. He was simply a receiver traded for another receiver, a footnote move for a team still searching for an identity. The Denver Broncos at the time weren't contenders. They weren't feared, they were a franchise defined by losing seasons and missed opportunities. And into that uncertainty stepped Moses, not loud, not demanding targets, just ready for work. Almost immediately, everything changed. Defenses could no longer crowd the line of scrimmage. Safeties had to respect the deep ball. Cornerbacks stopped squatting on routes. Moses didn't need volume to make an impact. His presence alone bent coverages. And in 1973, the effect showed up where it mattered most, the win column. Denver posted its first winning season in franchise history. Moses led the team with 8 touchdown catches, earned Pro Bowl honors, and quietly became the most dangerous player in the Broncos' passing game. He wasn't the face of the franchise, but he was the reason the offense finally had teeth. Here's the part history often misses. Denver didn't become respectable because of a system change or a lucky break. They became respectable because they finally had a receiver defenses feared. And Moses wasn't finished. As the years passed, his role grew, his efficiency became undeniable, and his connection with quarterback Craig Morton formed one of the most reliable downfield partnerships in the conference, even as the Broncos remained a run first team. So ask yourself this: what happens when a franchise that's never won learns how to stretch the field? Because the answer would soon carry Denver into territory it had never seen before, and Moses would be right at the center of it. There are stats that jump off the page, and then there are stats that don't make sense until you understand the era. Haven Moses' yards per catch falls into that second category. With the Denver Broncos, Haven Moses averaged 18 yards per reception over an entire decade. That's not a situational number. That's not inflated by one big season. That's a career average, still the highest in franchise history. To understand how absurd that is, you have to remember what 1970s football looked like. Teams didn't throw the ball 35 times a game. Passing was selective, conservative, and often a last resort. And yet, every time Moses caught the ball, Denver was nearly guaranteed a first down or more. He wasn't a possession receiver padding numbers, he was a field flipper. 3 catches could swing momentum. One route could erase a defensive game plan. From 1976 to 1978, Moses averaged more than 19 yards per catch 3 straight seasons, forcing defenses to choose between stopping the run or preventing disaster over the top. And here's the part that rarely gets discussed: Moses did this without being the focal point. The Broncos were built on defense and the ground game. His targets were limited, his opportunities controlled, yet his efficiency never dipped. So, why didn't his name dominate conversations? Because Moses' damage was subtle until it wasn't. Defenses felt him more than fans saw him, safeties backed up, corners hesitated, running lanes opened. Entire games tilted because one receiver demanded respect. And when Denver finally reached the moment where everything mattered, when the season came down to one game, one afternoon, one chance to make history, Moses didn't shrink. He exploded. And the performance that should have immortalized him was only one chapter away. Every franchise has a moment where its future either breaks through or stays invisible. For the Denver Broncos, that moment arrived on January 1st, 1978, in the AFC Championship game. Across the field stood the Oakland Raiders, experienced, confident, and expected to win. Denver was still seen as the upstart. The defense got the headlines, the toughness defined the identity. But when the game opened up, it wasn't brute force that decided it. It was Haven Moses. Moses didn't just contribute, he absolutely dominated. 5 catches, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns. Every reception felt like a turning point. Every route stretched the Raiders' secondary thinner. And when Denver needed separation, Moses delivered it in chunks so violent that they changed the tone of the game. This wasn't a role player having a hot day. This was a receiver seizing the biggest stage his franchise had ever seen. His performance powered Denver to its first Super Bowl appearance in franchise history, a moment that should have etched his name permanently into NFL lore. But something strange happened. When the story of that season was told, Moses wasn't centered. The defense became the headline, the grit became the narrative. His stat line became a footnote, despite being one of the most explosive championship performances of the era. Ask yourself this: how does a player dominate the biggest game of his life and still fade from memory? Because sometimes history doesn't forget performances, it forgets who delivered them. And for Moses, even his greatest moment wasn't enough to secure the recognition he deserved, setting the stage for the quiet fade that followed. By the time the 1980s arrived, Haven Moses had already done something few receivers ever managed. He outlasted eras. 14 NFL seasons, nearly 200 games played, elite efficiency that never dipped. And yet, Moses' career didn't end with the farewell tour or national reflection. It ended the same way it was lived, quietly. While still playing, Moses worked corporate jobs in the offseason, no branding deals, no media spotlight, just responsibility. When he retired at 35, he didn't chase attention, he went straight into community work, corporate leadership and service, Samsonite, Coors, nonprofits, hospitals, youth programs. Denver didn't just get a receiver, it got a citizen. Then came the moment that could have broken him. In 2003, Moses suffered a stroke that impacted his left side. For many former athletes, that's where the story fades, not his. He fought back the same way he always had: disciplined, stubborn, methodical, step by step, walk by walk, mile by mile. No cameras, no applause. He eventually took his place where he belonged, in the Broncos' Ring of Fame. His name etched alongside franchise builders, his record still standing. His 18 yards per catch still untouched to this day. And yet, ask the average NFL fan about explosive receivers of the 1970s, and Moses' name rarely comes up. That's the contradiction of Haven Moses. He was trusted enough to define a franchise's rise, reliable enough to deliver in the biggest moment, efficient enough to rewrite the record book, but quiet enough for history to move on without him. Which leaves us with the final question this series exists to answer: how many legends didn't disappear because they weren't great, but because greatness didn't look loud enough for their time? Haven Moses didn't need volume to matter. He mattered every time he touched the ball. History tends to move fast, and it often leaves the quiet giants behind. That's exactly why this channel exists. Here, we don't chase hype or recycled highlights. We rediscover the players who built the game, the ones whose impact doesn't always show up in modern debates, but still echoes through today's NFL. Stories like Haven Moses aren't side notes, they're foundations. If this is the kind of football history you care about, make sure you like the video, comment to keep the stories alive, and subscribe to the channel. Every subscribe helps us dig deeper, tell the stories louder, and make sure legends like Haven Moses are never forgotten again. This is more than nostalgia, this is preservation, and the next rediscovery is already waiting.